2, 3, 4.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Power of Music Thinking. My name is Christoph Zürn, and this is the podcast for people with a musical heart and a wicked job. We're looking for stories, insights and tools from the big world of music to inspire leaders and followers to listen, tune, play and perform in whatever field you're operating. Welcome to the show. Just two quick things before we dive in. First, if you want to make sure you never miss one of these conversations, just hit the follow or subscribe button in your podcast app. And second, if you're looking to take these ideas from listening into practice, the best place to go is musicthinking.com. That's where you can find my workshops, the book, and the full archive of all 65 plus episodes. Okay, so let's get to it. Many episodes we talk about how sound, listening, and music thinking can make a difference for good. We've explored themes like sound healing, music psychology, deep listening, and many more. All ways sound and music thinking can be a force for good. Today is somewhat different. We speak with Fabio Cervi, an audio investigator for Earshot, a non-profit audio investigation organization that works on the front lines of human rights and environmental advocacy. So Fabio's work isn't just about listening. It's about finding evidence. He uses sound to tell the stories of communities affected by violence. In our conversation today, Fabio shares sound files from two astonishing cases. First, we all hear and deconstruct the evidence from an attack on a silent vigil in Serbia, involving a mysterious sound that people felt rather than heard, and a potential sonic weapon known as the LRAD. Then we move to occupied Syrian Golan Heights to explore Sivtsava, a protest video game that uses real-world field recordings to fight against an illegal, massive wind turbine project. This is audio as ballistics, as evidence, and as advocacy. It's a truly fascinating look at how sound can be used in the fight for justice. Welcome, Fabio. Welcome to the Power of Music Thinking.
Hi there. Nice to be here.
Fabio, my first question. What was your first sonic experience or concert or record that had an impact on you?
I guess first sonic experience that I remember was I might have been 5 or 6 years old, and my parents pulled out a guitar that my mum bought in the 80s in London. It was a classical guitar, and it was the first time I really engaged with anything that made that kind of sound. I was about as tall as the guitar itself. There's a video of this actually, and I'm just like strumming things. I'm just reaching for the strings, and I'm improvising. That's the first memory.
So then you started to learn or play the guitar later?
I started to play the guitar later, much later. I mean, this is when I was 5 or 6 years old, and then in high school, I started to play. Or there was a music class that allowed for a very kind of flexible, altering schedule of 1 week you played guitar, 1 week you played piano, and you would kind of find out which instrument worked for you best. And I really kind of resonated with the guitar, and this was when I was about 11 or 12, and then from there on I just immersed myself, and I ended up actually breaking the guitar that that I first strummed when I was 6 years old. I'll never forget this. I sat on it.
Oh,
I was playing it. I left it on a couch. I went for dinner. I came back and I forgot it was there. And but actually, it was an important moment. I saw this instrument break, and I realized this is such a delicate kind of object that now I can no longer use.
was it more? Was it the sound of the breaking, or was it the feel of? Can you describe that?
It was a mixture of both. I remember the sound of the breaking was a clean break right where the neck meets the body. And also the feeling of this object breaking below me that I couldn't see because I had just come back and sat down and didn't see where I had put it.
And the realization what it actually was.
Yeah, and the disappointment of realizing, well, I can't pick up my practice session now. I can't play for the next I don't know how long.
But you bought a new guitar.
But I bought the new guitar. Yes, another classical guitar, which I still have.
Okay, so that also is a bit of bridge to what you do now. Maybe just I mean about the investigation of something that breaks.
Yes, I guess so. I mean, music and guitar was the first entry into, let's call it a kind of sonic way of thinking. And I mean, I've been playing continuously for the last, I mean, over 10 years. I write, I record, I produce. And then in university, I went to study architecture. And by the end of my master's, I started to reflect a lot on acoustics, on the role of a kind of sonic architecture. How do we design as architects space to sound through, to make music through, to make noise through? And how in turns do musicians affect the design of spaces? Because obviously many of these architectures that are made for playing in, concert halls and stadiums and theaters, they're obviously designed for certain kinds of music playing. So in a way, musicians unknowingly affect the design of architecture. And this is something I wrote in my master's. Musicians end up being a kind of latent architect that as they write and perform and create sort of cultural identities around genres and instruments, they end up shaping the space around them as much as the culture that they're embedded in.
Beautiful. So it's like it's not, the sound is not there of itself. So there's always a sound in a space, in a room, in an architecture. That's
Yes, yeah. There are traces. Every space has a kind of has a plethora of sonic traces. I mean, the easiest one to think about is the church, and how the church symbolizes, or it kind of embodies a form of communication that is that of preaching through song, through choirs. The space of a cathedral or of a church is very much designed to ease the form of communication and the reading of scripture through singing rather than speaking. Which is why when you walk in a church now and you see speakers everywhere, the first thing that I see is actually we've lost something so central to what these spaces were designed to perform as, i.e. huge resonant chambers that were supposed to have these prolonged choir notes extend and kind of cycle and harmonize them with the next note and make the impact of ceremony even stronger.
so the architect is the big acoustic room, your acoustic box, just to to transport your sound. But I think often it doesn't work so perfectly with speech. If you have a sermon and it's maybe too quick, then because of all the reverberation, it's very hard to hear. I recall I think it was 2 years ago. I also play music sometimes in churches, and we played in a church in Cologne where there was so much reverberation. Where I thought, how can people just understand what someone is talking, is the sermon? Do you think then it's more like the visual part is more stressed and not the acoustical part, or do you think every architect is also, so what you just also for yourself said, is also a musician in some way?
Yes, I mean to the first part of the question, um, of course, this extends beyond even churches, that the visual is stressed way more than the sonic or the acoustic, and this in fact ties into then my current job as an audio investigator, how it essentially builds on that notion. We think through sight, and we leave out this sonic kind of dimension of space that actually can be a lot more important, and in fact, in many cases, as I will show, is more important. And so architects are, let's say, complicit in this, let's say, sensory hijacking. I mean, in architecture, thinking about acoustics is always an added feature. It's rarely included in the foundations of a design. You always hire an acoustic consultant to come on later in the project, when they're usually there to kind of plaster up the kind of the acoustically imperfect conditions of a visually driven design.
Which, by the way, in history, if you would go 2000 or even more years back, I think the architecture of an amphitheater or a Greek or Roman amphitheater was built for transporting the sound, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
More functional building, and the building, and then it might be second. But that's a wild guess. So maybe that's a subject for a scholar to dive in, where the sound effect is stronger. But you already mentioned, so at the moment you're working for Earshot, but maybe just give us a brief overview what you do at the moment. Then we can dive a little bit more into what Earshot is doing.
Mm-hmm. Right now, so I am an audio investigator at Earshot, and Earshot is an investigative agency that undertakes sonic investigations together with and on behalf of communities affected by state violence, by corporate violence, by environmental violence. So what we do is we tell stories and we investigate cases of violence through sound. We have worked with dozens of agencies, dozens of journalistic agencies and human rights organizations across the world to tell such stories from all parts of the world, from Palestine, from India, France, the UK, the US, and we really work on a wide range of cases that vary from audio verification. We kind of verify if audios are authentic. We also work a lot on audio ballistics. So we analyze open source videos of gunshots or explosions, and we try to reconstruct the dynamics of where different people are in these incidents. We also do longer projects of research around sound. Our most recent one, which I will talk about, is Zipzafa, which is a investigation on green colonialism and on the use of wind turbines and the sonic kind of debris of wind power in annexing a community in the Syrian-occupied Golan Heights. So this is a brief kind of overview of Earshot, and my role really comes in as an investigator. And with my background as an architect and as a musician, and having also since undertaken coursework in forensic audio analysis and AI-generated audio, my role is to really produce these investigations in the form of reports, and to produce also tools to investigate sound. We at Earshot we like to we really like to think about how technologies can be used to tell stories around sound. Again, this leftover product. How do we tell these stories of something that maybe we, as a collective, we don't have that much of a literacy to understand? So visualizing and telling these stories and kind of spatializing sound is a central part of Earshot's mandate.
I think it's super interesting because investigation means you are doing a research on something that has happened. So like in a criminal case, for example, and I think it's quite surprising that audio, and I think it's not surprising for the listener of the Power of Music Thinking podcast, because we're diving into sound in many different ways, and also how there are analogies to the business world or to other fields. Like we had a sonic UX researcher, and we also had once an architect who is also a composer. So there's in some way is there a connection, or let's say it's one big family. But can you tell us a little bit, where are you at the moment, and is it a new field, or are there people all over the world doing something comparable, and that we really should fight or for audio, because maybe audio is the new game changer and really can prove what really happened?
Well, I mean, yes, it's a new field. It has emerged obviously with the emergence of technologies like with radio or with body cameras. The presence of audio evidence, specifically in the legal field, has emerged in the 70s and 80s, which obviously that's almost. It's 40 years from since today, but of course that is relatively a short period of time in the longer kind of history of what constitutes evidence in a court. Audio is becoming more and more prominent in court cases, and our work indeed is designed also to, if needed, to play such a role. It is just as important as any other form of evidence, and in fact the claim that we make is that oftentimes it is more important than any other form of evidence. It is often the only evidence that is left over when you look at specific kinds of cases. Again, the cases we investigate are with communities that are directly affected. So what we find often is when we are sent material to investigate, we usually are dealing with material that is, by all accounts, let's say, improper in some ways. In the case of audio ballistics, and right now we're working a lot with people in Palestine who are trying to survive a genocide, and what we receive are videos of people taking cover, of being under fire. So what you see in the videos is actually, you don't see anything really. People are trying to take shelter, and the only thing left to kind of document what is going is the sound of gunfire, is the sound of drones flying above, and is the sound of strikes. So in these cases, the audio and the fact that there is no video and that there is only audio points to the shortfall of working with an exclusively visual form of evidence. And so all of our work centers around this notion. Audio is central in telling these stories of violence, and the nature of sound, if we have to think about it in terms of a kind of a scientific sense, sound is let's say a wasteful product. I mean, sound is a dissipation of energy through air. And so what we call sound, which most of it amounts to noise really, what we call about sound, what we say about sound and noise is that actually the fact that this is a waste product means that it often needs more kind of discourse and more analysis, because in this kind of wasteful product, as we have found through our investigations, we find a very rich field of study and of significance in the current political moment in the world.
Everybody can really imagine if you can't see anything because you have to cover, you have to duck, you hear everything, and maybe your ears are more trained in listening to all the differences. It reminds me, I was last year at the Art Biennale in Venice, and in one of the pavilions was some kind of very strange karaoke. It was from Ukrainians that were mimicking the sound of different weapons. So, and it was really immersive in that sense that they really, if you don't know what it is, it's like a, and they were doing things like this, and they were asking people to also do it, and then you understand. But you have to understand this is a different type of weapon, and maybe you have to do something with that information. That was really crazy. But back to your story. So their sound is when people record it on their mobile. I assume they record 44 kilohertz, or I don't know, because and for people that don't know what it is, so it's really like a CD quality of sound compared to the video that for an older phone is much more creepy. So you would rather have better sound quality than video quality. Is this something that you all also take into account?
Of course, yeah. Whenever we receive a video, we always look at, frame rates and sample rates and bit rates. So we mostly we deal with 44.1 or 48 kilohertz content. But the point that you make is interesting, and we think often about how one of the ways to understand how sound can be seen as actually more interesting and more important than video often is just this notion that video records around 25 frames per second, but sound records at 44,000 samples per second. So there is objectively much more information contained in 1 second of sound than there is of video footage.
Hang on, we have to let's process this again. So it's 30 versus 44 100,000.
Exactly.
Right? Wow. So I think that's that sink in. So there's much more information per second in audio than in video.
Exactly, yes.
So that already technically that would be a case to convince people from, hey, if there's more information, we could also get more information out of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Shall we dive into one of your cases?
Yeah, sounds good. Maybe we can start with the case in Serbia, which is an attack on a silent vigil. So just to give context, in March 2025, a huge protest in the city of Belgrade in Serbia took place, where Serbians gathered, as they had for the past months, and as they currently still are doing. They had gathered in the capital city to observe 15 minutes of silence for victims of a accident in a railway collapse incident. So the rooftop of a railway had collapsed and killed 15 people. So catalyzed by this and by various other grievances against the Serbian government, Serbian citizens gathered to observe 50 minutes of silence, 1 minute for each of the victims. What happened on the 15th of March, as people were gathering, they entered a silent vigil, and around the 8th minute, all of a sudden, they are prompted to, this crowd of tens of thousands of people are suddenly prompted to move to the side of this huge boulevard where they were gathered in a kind of moment of panic. And what they described was that they were suddenly attacked with an extremely, extremely loud sound that was akin to the sound of a jet flying right above their head. So all of a sudden they are prompted in this total quiet to find cover in the sides of this boulevard. The moment quickly goes viral on social media, and you can see in the various videos that circulated exactly this. People are observing the silent vigil, and all of a sudden the crowd splits. They split from the center of the road, and thinking that an airplane is about to land on them. And of course, the airplane never lands. So what happened then, already the day after, we got lots of messages, and we realized that a Serbian student at the university in Vienna had been texting their friends to say, okay, send your videos to Earshot. They might know what's happening here. So we get inundated with these video clips. People are tagging us on Instagram. And so we start to look through all these videos, and we produce this kind of short video clip where we look through a spectrographic image. And a spectrographic image is basically an image that describes which frequencies are being played across time in a recording. So we make this quick video that shows in a spectrographic image how we were finding these very faint sounds just before the crowd kind of panics and runs to the side. We were finding the sound that was consistent with a kind of sonic weapon called a vortex cannon. As soon as we publish this video, it itself goes viral. It gets picked up by many Serbian news organizations, including by the Prime Minister of Serbia, who immediately, along with other government persons, dismiss any kind of use of sonic weapon, point to a kind of confusion in the crowd as the culprit for this sudden panic, and calls us out by name as kind of stirring trouble and not and just fabricating the story. So after this first kind of quick investigative piece, we then partnered with a Serbian organization called CRTA, which stands for the Center of Research, Transparency and Accountability. And with CRTA, we start to work directly with the people in the protest. CRTA interviews the people on the ground, and they gathered over 3,200 written testimonies. And in these testimonies, we already started to piece together a very consistent story. So people were really describing that all of a sudden, in a matter of seconds, they describe hearing something that sounded like a jet engine, a really loud kind of race car racing past them. Some people even use the analogy of a cavalry of 200 horses trampling above them. So we start to use these written testimonies to piece together what people were hearing. And at the same time, we start to organize to interview some of these witnesses. So we ended up interviewing 15 ear witnesses, we call them. So witnesses with a specific kind of sonic experience in this case. And we start to prepare a kind of interview format where we want to understand what they were hearing, and we want to try to recreate what they had heard on the night. Again, because when you look at the videos, and there's dozens of this, you really hear very faint sounds that could or could not be the sonic weapon, but in any case, do not match the intensity of the testimonies that people were describing. Maybe we can play the first clip here. So let's kind of immerse into the sound of the protest. This is a clip of the silence that preceded the sound of the attack. So as this plays, maybe I can just give a bit more context. Again, you have to imagine you are in a huge boulevard in Serbia. You can look at this on the map. It's called Kranja Milana Street. Yes, and you're surrounded by tens of thousands of people, and you are hearing really, maybe the sounds of people kind of brushing past each other, but in any case, observing this very respectful moment of silence for the victims of this incident. In the written testimonies, people were describing also a really high attunement to any of the sounds that were disrupting the silent vigil. Again, if you are in this moment of reflection, of collective reflection and collective mourning, really, of course, you're observant to any kind of sound that might infringe on this on this moment of mourning. So people describe, I could hear a cough 200 meters away. I was really focused. There was the sound of a drone. Some people even described hearing the sound of a popcorn machine at the junction of the road. So we're already building a case, and we can see a case where the crowd was actually really sonically attuned to their environment. So what we then started asking the crowd was to describe what they were hearing, and as I mentioned, they heard all kinds of sounds. What we often encounter when we have to ask someone to describe a sound is that it's almost impossible to describe a sound without an analogy. You have to go through language and through descriptions to convey what you had felt. And what people felt was something really anomalous that they had never heard before. It was a sound that was extremely loud and that they felt was inside of them. This was a kind of a description that consistently came through in the testimonies. So if you play the second sound, this is the sound of 20 hertz. And 20 hertz is basically one of the lowest frequencies that humans can hear. And we had prepared the sound to play to the 15 ear witnesses, again, because we had seen this consistent description of the sound that I heard was something that was inside me. Very low frequencies have the tendency of being more sort of felt than heard, so we wanted to see if they responded to the sound. So as we played the sound, we consistently were getting reactions that this was very much what they were hearing, this really low rumble that was, and I quote directly, inside of me. This was a sound that was inside of me.
It's a bit like if you go to electronic dance music or to techno parties. I imagine that some people recognize it, so it's not, you don't really hear it, but you feel it all over.
Exactly. This is what happens when you stand in front of a very loud speaker and you hear the bass really resonating through your body. So as we were asking all these questions, we started to piece together sounds that people were hearing consistently and sounds that they were not hearing consistently. And again, we played them sounds of engines, which they were responding to, sounds of sirens they weren't really responding to, and this started to rule out some of the potential sonic weapons that we were aware of that we wanted to test whether or not the crowd was exposed to. We also played back the sound of a vortex cannon, which we had taken from a clip online, and that one really did not get much of a response. So we were seeing that the sound that they were describing was really anomalous. So by piecing all these sounds together, we then were able to reconstruct the sound of the attack. And I want to give some warning. This is a really intense sound, and with that, let's hear it if you want to give any more context, Christoph. Right.
That's it. So 5 seconds of sound.
It's one of the most intense sounds I've ever heard, and I can only imagine what it must have been like during a silent vigil. Again, the context outside the sound is as important as the sound. People were observing and were meeting regularly, week after week, to be in a moment of silence. So
maybe just to recap, we heard 3 sound examples. So the first one was a real recording live there with the silent vigil. And do you think that the 2 other sounds that we heard were overlapping the let's say the first sound file?
In the sample we just heard, we just reconstructed the sound of the visual. But if you go to our website, you can actually find a kind of demonstration of what it would sound like to hear that sound overlaid to the sound of the silent vigil. And this leads to the next part of the investigation, where we looked at a particular sonic weapon to try to understand why such a sound was not recorded and why such a sound was heard consistently throughout the crowd.
Hang on. Consistently, we just heard 5 seconds, right?
Yes.
So how long did the ear witnesses say that this sound that we just heard 5 seconds lasted?
Oh, right. Well, when I say consistently, I meant consistently heard by many people.
Yeah.
And in terms of length, it was about as long as you heard it here. In reconstructing the sound, we also were playing clips to understand how long did this last, and it really lasted, a second, 2 seconds, about the length of what we just played.
Okay, but it was so super loud. I can imagine. Was it done by speakers? Did you have any visual cues that you say, oh wow, in this one of these, let's say, police cars or other cars, there could have been a sound or a sound cannon or?
So, I mean, the short answer to that is yes. Soon after the protest, there were images that were posted online by one of the members of parliament in Serbia of a police van near the protest, where on the hood of the police van, a kind of speaker-looking object was mounted. This object is an LRAD, and an LRAD stands for a long-range acoustic device. These are exactly what you said. These are sound cannons, essentially. These are speakers that use technologies of noise cancellation to direct sound in these very narrow beams, kind of like a flashlight. And what they are used for is to disperse protests, to control crowds. These are forms of crowd control technologies that emerged in the 2000s in the United States. So, again, if we look back at what the government says as soon as we published that first clip, no, we did not have any kind of weapon, we did not use any kind of weapon. And then you have images that start to show, well, this particular kind of sonic weapon was present there. There were other leaks in the government that were showing that that the government was in possession of multiple of these cannons. So this kind of weapon was present, and it was denied to be at the protest by the government. So we were trying to piece together, okay, now that we know this weapon was present, could this weapon have caused what the crowd is hearing? And if it did, why are we not hearing it as clearly on the recordings? So we started to explore and to look at the technical specifications of this weapon. We understood how it worked, what kind of let's say how wide this beam of sound was, what the decay of the sound would have been over a distance. And just to give a sense, this kind of speaker plays any kind of sound that you can plug in. You will, if you look online, you will mostly find cases of it used where it's producing a siren, but you can essentially plug in any kind of sound to play back. Mm-hmm. So this is already an indication that it could potentially have been used to play the sound. And what we were finding is that the kind of degree of projection of sound that typically that the LRAD produces, this extremely narrow range that plays sounds as loud as 140 decibels, which is as loud as being next to a jet engine. Yeah. In these narrow beams, you have this extremely loud projection, and just as you move away from this narrow beam, the sound rapidly decays. So it quickly gets quieter as soon as you step out of this beam. So we simulated this kind of phenomenon, and on our website you can show, and I encourage to read the full report which is available on our website, and to also interact with the various sounds. There are obviously additional ones that make up the reconstruction that we heard. And again, one of the things we show is how, depending on where you are in this beam, the sound of the LRAD rapidly decays and becomes quieter and quieter, and often as quiet as ambient noise levels. So if you are outside of this beam and you are standing in this boulevard, you would not hear anything particularly loud or particularly louder than the silence that you are surrounded by.
Wow, that's interesting, and it's really like investigation. It's really like getting into all the details. By the way, it reminds me, I studied musicology, and my specialty was electronic music from the 60s. So where you hear something on, in my case, it was the record, and you compare it to what instruments and what machines were used to to change that sine wave sound, for example. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's also, just thinking out loud, it would be interesting to get musicologists into the play, because they could find they're trained, or music psychology. We had some on the podcast as well that could be interesting to also go deeper in. But very interesting. So it's really like a real case, a real investigation case, also a really strong description in what happened. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Nice. Mm-hmm. Maybe just to close this, what happened? Is it now everybody, the government is denying, and you're bringing more and more evidence?
Well, I mean, in the context of Serbia, of course, as we publish then this reconstructed sound, the government again is on is denying any kind of use. Again, they are kind of saying, no, people did not hear that. They were distracted by the sound of fireworks. The panic was caused by this or that. And so our role really has come in to show what people consistently describe, and we kind of leave the audience, and in supporting the people on the ground in Serbia, the aim of this reconstruction is really to arm them with proof to show, look at what we heard. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Shall we go to your other case? And it's in some way completely different, because it's also a game, isn't it?
Yes. Let's dive into that one. This is another one of our investigations. This was a longer research project. And as you mentioned, it's a video game. It's called Zefzafa. And it is a video game that fights green colonialism in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights, as I mentioned at the beginning. And it fights or contests a proposed wind turbine by the state of Israel in these occupied territories on one of the last pieces of lands remaining for Jolanis, which is the community in Golan Heights, also known as Jolan. So the video game started as a kind of research into, and this is something, let's say, unique in the many investigations we do. This was a research into a case of violence that had not yet happened per se, or had not yet happened sonically.
It's like a speculative investigation.
Exactly. The point of this video game, which essentially is a tool, was to contest this project, to show how these wind turbines amounted to a form of annexation, of a further annexation, because again, just to give context, the Jolan, the Golan Heights were occupied in 1967. 70% of the territory was seized. 130,000 people living across over 300 villages were displaced from their homes, and those who remain still today have endured since military occupation, and are now living in 4 remaining villages in Jolan, in the very north of the occupied territories. So these communities already face a history of occupation, and so this turbine project is another level, and a kind of new level of occupation that mixes together with notions of green energy. So we were contacted in 2023 as a result of these plans to construct these 31 turbines. It's 31 of these turbines that are being planned. And there were lots of protests in Jolan that were organized locally to fight against this project. I should mention the wind turbines in questions are not your typical kind of turbines that you'd see in the countryside in Europe. These are some of the largest land-based turbines in the world. And as we get in touch with a local organization, a human rights organization, Al-Marsad, we start to kind of put together, what kind of turbines are these? How loud are these turbines going to be? And we see that in Geldorf in Germany, a small town in Germany, there's a similar wind farm. So what we did was we did a site visit and we recorded with really hi-fi sound recording equipment these turbines in Germany to understand exactly what the noise level of these turbines was going to be and how it changed, from the closer and further you got.
And maybe also good to compare, because if they're in Germany, if they use them, they might also make some noise. So what's the difference there?
So what we found is that, these turbines, when we went to Germany, we were initially a bit, let's say, disappointed that on a calm, windy day, well, first of all, that we had arrived and the wind was not that strong. So the turbines were not actually turning that much or that fast. But already, even on a calm, windy day, what you would find is that, walking right up to one of the turbines, they are quite loud, and it's this droning sound that reaches up to 80, 90 decibels, which is as loud as, a busy highway.
We have the sound files here, so
Oh, right, of course, let's do that.
So shall we go to the Geldorf turbine first?
Let's do that, yes. So if we keep playing the sound, I'll try to speak over it, but you can imagine how impossible it is to live next to one of these turbines. And yeah, let's maybe pause it there.
So, but there's also some kind of melody in it. So,
yes, yeah.
And then
we were struck actually by how rich the kind of sound was in Germany. You have sounds of cables kind of clanging. Each one of these turbines, these are massive. They set on these concrete bases that are 10, 15 meters in diameter. These are really, really massive. And but again, so we're trying to understand, okay, according to European regulation and German regulations, in Geldorf, the nearest residents are 5 kilometers away, and they can still claim to hear these turbines on
okay, 5 kilometers.
So we even asked people around the wind farm, do you hear these? What do you think? And without even getting too political, we really had political answers in the shape of, for me it's fine, but some people have problems, or some people this and that. Again, EU regulations vary from country to country. In any case, the standard is you cannot build up to a few kilometers away from these turbines. In Jolan, the context would be different. These turbines are planned to be built as close as 35 meters to houses and dwellings. This site this site where the turbines are being built as we speak is again on one of the last open areas for the Jolani communities that is usually used as farms to grow apples, to grow to kind of for sheep herding and for cattle. And also throughout this landscape, you have these forms of housings and dwellings that are kind of like countryside houses to the really nearby city, which is just north of this plot of land and just south of a very important mountain, Jabal el-Sheikh.
Okay. So
and I paint this picture because, again, this village, one of the 4 remaining villages, is constrained to the north by this mountain and by the border with Syria and Lebanon. And to the south, it has this open plot of land. To the east, there is the border, this militarized, really highly militarized border that Israel has built with Syria. So really the south is the only area to expand. To the west you have Israeli settlements, which are illegal under international law and yet keep being built. So the south really is the only place that this community can expand. And it's on this plot of land that these turbines plan to be built. So we partnered with a local sound engineer and musician, Busher Khan Jabu Saleh. And Busher went around Jolan in particular, this area, to record various samples of sound. And what you hear here is the typical character of Jolan. You have the sound of birds, you have the sound of wind, of a light breeze. You can hear some construction sound. That construction sound is the sound of, Jolanis building houses or extending their homes in the city and in the countryside. You might hear also the sound of animals or in farms nearby. So in any case, this recording paints a picture of the life in Jolan. And maybe here I'll start to connect back to the video game. The video game incorporates all of these sounds. It is a simulation, a let's say one-to-one virtual simulation of Jolan, where all of these recordings, there's some 30 plus recordings, field recordings, geolocated into the landscape, which you can walk around and navigate for you to really immerse into this, into these soundscapes. What we're hearing is a wedding invitation, amplified on loudspeakers to the whole village, really. So this is an open invitation for the village to join in on this wedding. So again, Jolan is a very small community, but very tightly knit, and what we hear through the sound is this really rich kind of soundscape and community. Let's play the third recording.
There are also a lot of wind noises directly in the microphone.
Exactly. So what we heard there was another Jolani musician, Amr Nda, a saxophonist, recorded by Busher. And we hear him playing the saxophone. So this is again one of the many sounds that we have placed into the video game environment. And what we essentially, the argument that we make, even through the title of the video game, which Zafzafa means wind sound, so the sound produced by wind. What we are kind of showing with these recordings, and in the case of Amr, is that noise and the ability to control noise is one of the central arguments in the fight for self-determination for this community. These wind turbines propose an uncontrollable amount of noise that seeks to displace further and disconnect further a community from the landscape. And each of the other sounds that Busher records are a way to kind of show how the community organizes against this form of expropriation. So the breath sounds of a saxophone are stand in direct contrast to the sound of these turbines. There's even a sound of a local flute player, which so again, here we have another moment of a wind instrument that stands in direct contrast to these turbines. And in this moment in particular, another person that was there with Busha to record this Ibrahim, this local sheep herder and flute player, we hear this other voice that bursts into songs, and this voice is singing a local song that speaks, that is kind of speaking to a notion of it's an ode to the sea, essentially, and it is speaking about how the sea is kind of connecting these cities on the coast between in the coast in Lebanon and Palestine, and it kind of offers a notion of reconnecting disconnected lands and severed lands. So through these kind of wind sounds, we also get a dive into these histories of communities that have been split, that keep that still are split, and so these songs and the argument of Zefzafa is really a way to imagine a kind of reconnection through these kind of sonic means. Briefly about Zefzafa, again, this is a video game environment. You can download it on our website. And you can hear all of these sounds as you move through the landscape. It has a typical video game interface. And you can, and only in Zefzafa for now, you can turn on the turbines, which we have placed based on these drawings that we gathered from Israeli construction companies. You can play, you can press play on the turbines and hear how they affect all these sounds. You can turn the turbines on and turn them off, and we built this video game with a tool called Unreal Engine, which allows for very accurate simulations of how sound decays and increases based on how close you approach a sound source. So this tool really is made to provide an accurate form of simulation for people to understand what exactly the impact of these kind of turbines are on a community. And maybe one point here is, just to preface, we're not against wind turbines. Our argument is that it is a community that should choose where, how, if turbines get built. So the argument in Zefzafa is really for people to arm themselves with this tool and to show, and we know there are cases around the world, in Finland and in Mexico, of communities facing the same kind of situations, different contexts, but in ways in which green energy is being hijacked to expropriate people from the land. So we want to show how this tool can be used across different communities in this struggle.
So if you just mentioned it, so sonic self-determination, if this is the word, it should go for, in one of your cases in Norway with the Sami people, where, wind, now farm sounds maybe even very sympathetic, but an industrial park of big wind turbines that really change how people live there. And the paradox is that you want and need green energy to, let's say, save the world or address climate change, but that the people that are not responsible for the climate change now even double have to pay the bill, that they can't do what they do and what they did, and how they conserve just the land so that our climate stays in balance. They get, let's say, as far as I've understood the case, attacked by big industry just with the argument of just we want to we need the green energy, and we don't want to have the green energy in our cities. Interesting case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So your game is something like just to be aware for, let's say, circling back to a law case and to a judge, for example, to train also the judge and make clear what sound does.
Exactly. The idea with many of our investigations is to disseminate as much a kind of sonic culture of listening, but also a lexicon and a language to describe these kinds of ways in which violence is being co-opted and is being accelerated towards different communities.
Right. So until now, in the Power of Music Thinking podcast, we had, let's say, positive examples. So we talked about deep listening or even sound healing and how this can have a positive impact. We talked about the use of sound, like in Sonic UX, in user experience, how you use sound to make something better. But these are the dark patterns of sound. And so sound is per se not good or bad. In that sense, so it can also be used in a way that we all don't want.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate this because listening is one of the top leadership skills, and I feel honored about this. It is my mission to find, create, and share inspirations for meaningful collaboration based on music analogies. If you want to support this, please subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating, or write a review on iTunes or Spotify. And more inspirations can be found on musicthinking.com. We have a blog, and you can download the Music Thinking Framework. And finally, I would love to hear your feedback. And if you need help with a business challenge, please reach out to me via email, podcast@musicthinking.com.